Hello. In the Crown of Aragon, 639 years ago, it was February 14th, 1387. My name is Jonathan Seyfried. I'm a PhD candidate in history at the University of New Mexico. And this is the Historian's Notebook, a podcast about how history gets made. Season 1 is titled Molt Cara Companiona. We're looking at a document from each day of the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violant de Bar. Let's begin today's document. Today is Valentine's Day. Happy Valentine's Day, everybody. Well, at the time that Joan and Violant ruled as king and queen of the Crown of Aragon, Valentine's Day celebrations had not really kicked off just yet. There's some debate over whether there's a reference to actual Valentine's Day as we know it today as a celebration of love in Chaucer. There's a bit of debate about whether that reference really is to Saint Valentine as we think of Valentine's Day. But then in the 15th century, there's a lot of documentation of Valentine's Day being celebrated as a day to commemorate romantic love. But that's the 15th century, and we're still in the 1300s, well before any known documentation of Valentine's Day as a day to celebrate love. And so maybe we should return to a tradition that it's not really a tradition at all, actually. It's a moment in the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violant de Bar, because on Valentine's Day, Joan and Violant were probably still talking about the Bishop of Valencia. And on Valentine's Day itself, Violant wrote a letter to the Pope and told the Pope how much she and Joan really wanted the Bishop of Valencia, James, Joan's first cousin, once removed, to become a cardinal. So I think writing to the Pope together is not exactly a modern notion of romantic love, but I think that they were really in cahoots together in this effort to get James, the Bishop of Valencia, to become a cardinal. And so I am happy to report that on this Valentine's Day, we do have some evidence that Joan and Violant were, well, I can't say expressing romantic love to the Pope, or the love that they had for each other to the Pope, but we just have another instance in which we can see coordination between them in the letters that we have in the registers. Now, this particular letter has some interesting features, and it's in Latin, so of course I struggled, and of course I went to ChatGPT. First of all, we know that the sender is Violant because it's in a register of hers, and at the bottom of it, there's a clear probata that labels Iolantis Regina Aragon. Oh gosh, the ending is abbreviated, and I don't have a good enough grasp of Latin to tell you what the real ending is. But anyway, we know it's from Violant. It's in a register called Varia, another Varia register, not the same Varia as yesterday. So yes, there were two different Varia registers being contributed to at the same time. Or maybe the binding of these Varia registers happened later and it wasn't quite as intentional on the part of the Chancery staff to have two different Varia registers going at the same time. The dating clause has in it, right before the date of the 14th of February, that the seal level is Nostro Sigillo Secreto Asueto. So it's not the same as yesterday's, which was Sigillo Secreto Acostumat. This one ends in Asueto. So I am just going to try to investigate that and figure out the difference. But I don't have it yet. So stay tuned. I'm going to get it by the end of this year. The difference between Sigillo Secreto Acostumat and Sigillo Secreto Asueto. There's some other interesting stuff at the bottom of this letter. The first chunk of addressee material is the very long official title of the Avignon Pope Clement VI. And I just want to point out, we've had this once before in the podcast, but the last line of that 3-line chunk has the word universalis. So, universalis ecclesiae, so the universal church. It's a statement that keys into the overall tense context of the Great Western Schism, and you could hear Shadows feeling the tension of that schism. Isn't that right, Shadow? Yeah. Yes. Okay. That's enough. It was disturbing. I haven't talked about the Great Western Schism for a while, so it'd probably be good to review that and to explain what has got my cat Shadow so upset about it. The Great Western Schism arose out of a dispute over the selection of the Pope after Gregory XI had died. And that's it. So it's not really much of a doctrinal difference between the two sides that split apart. They're instead just really focused on the leadership dynamics and the internal politics of the selection of the Pope. And so, I think earlier I might have accidentally said Clement VI, but actually it's Clement VII who is the Pope in Avignon, and the Pope in Rome at this time is Urban VI. And so the leaders of the various polities in Western Europe had to make a choice or attempt to stay neutral. This whole thing went down in 1378, and at that time, Pere the Ceremonious was on the throne, and he had been around long enough. He was kind of old at that point. He had been around long enough to have seen all kinds of crazy instability. And so he figured, you know what? They're just going to sort this out. I'm not going to bother taking a side here. And he wanted to just wait it out. But unfortunately, it was going to go on for a while. It actually doesn't get resolved until after 1400. And so Joan, who had a bit more of a forethought of the future in his worldview, he decided that he was going to make a choice, and with his Francophilia, he chose the Avignon Pope, Clement VII. And so we see actually that Joan is one of the most steadfast allies of the Avignon papacy. And then one other thing that I'll reiterate from an earlier episode is that the Pope who comes to power after Clement VII, which is, this transition happens in the 1390s at some point, that person is from the Crown of Aragon. That person is actually from the de Luna family, related to Marti's wife, Maria de Luna. Not a super close relation, but like definitely in the clan. And so the Avignon papacy becomes so closely connected to the Crown of Aragon over the course of Joan and Violant's reign. And my feeling as I'm looking at the documentation and reading the secondary literature is that Violant has some kind of connection also to Clement VII. I haven't found exactly what that is, but I think her social network and the social network of Clement VII have a lot of overlap. So we see Violant writing to the Pope directly on a lot of occasions, and this is one of them because I looked around the other pages in Joan's register from when he wrote to the cardinals about James, the Bishop of Valencia, and I couldn't find a letter from Joan to the Pope directly, but here's Violant a couple days later writing to the Pope directly and saying, hey, my husband the king and I would be very pleased if you could expedite, there's the word expedire there in this letter, if you could expedite this process for James, the Bishop of Valencia, to become a cardinal. So that's actually the content of this letter, but there's one last bit of writing at the very bottom of the folio underneath the chunk for the addressee of the Pope himself. And in this selection, we've got some language that indicates that all of the cardinals in the College of Cardinals are also going to get a copy of this letter, but it's going to be somehow adjusted. So the last phrase in that bottom chunk is quae fuenter tradite sine subscriptionibus. So something is going to be left out, sine, without the subscript. And I'm not quite sure how much of an adjustment is being indicated here. But I do find it really interesting that the scribes took the time to spell out that there would be a difference in content for the copies of this letter that are being sent to the College of Cardinals, because usually they don't get that nitty-gritty with what is going to be different about copies. So maybe this is indicating there's something a bit more different in the outgoing letters, the copies that are going to, or the one copy that's going to go to the College of Cardinals. Or maybe they're just making sure to be super clear because this is a high status recipient. I do want to say at this point that I'm noticing that Violant writes to the Pope a lot. Like, it's almost like every other day she's writing to the Pope. So it's like the Pope update of the day, it seems. But in this instance, we've got the coordinated effort between Joan and Violant on behalf of the Bishop of Valencia, trying to get him to become a cardinal. So it's not just, the latest Pope update or like the latest thing on the Pope list from Violant. We've got, in addition to that, we've got this coordinated effort that's happening that I see again and again and again, and others, such as Claire Ponsic, have pointed out is just happening a lot in the correspondence of Joanne and Violant. I did want to just mention really quickly something else about Valencia, which is that it is very closely interwoven into the governance and economy of the Crown of Aragon. It's been under the sovereignty of the Crown of Aragon for about 150 years. So we're not talking about some kind of far-flung random region. We're talking about a very interwoven part of the Crown of Aragon, as you can imagine from the fact that one of the main authorities there is the first cousin once removed of Joanne himself, and I'm talking about James, the Bishop of Valencia. All right, thanks for listening to this episode of The Historian's Notebook, Season 1, Molt cara compagnona. If you are leaving with more questions than you arrived with, I have done my job. Remember, the motto of The Historian's Notebook is dissatisfaction guaranteed. Visit the website to see an image of today's document and additional show notes. And listen again tomorrow to hear about the next day in the first year of the reign of King Joanne I of Aragon and Queen Violante de Bar. In the meantime, take care.